Good morning. You're watching All You Need to Know on BloombergQuint Live, and I'm Alex Matthew. First, the headlines. Masked men armed with sticks and rods attack students and teachers at the Jawaharlal Nehru University on Sunday. PTI reports that at least 28 students, including the student union president, were injured. Iran abandons the nuclear deal with the US as a fallout of the killing of its military general. Oil climbs while gold is at a 7-year high as tensions rise. Titan says it is banking on the reasonable growth in jewelry sales in the festive season to meet its revised sales growth forecast for FY20. Adani Ports will buy a 75% stake in a Krishnapatnam Port from Hyderabad's CVR Group for 5,520 crore rupees. And Ajit Pawar has been allotted the finance portfolio in Maharashtra's cabinet reshuffle. The Congress gets ministries like Revenue and PWD. The holiday-shortened weekend ended on a sour note for the U.S. markets on Friday. The losses posted during Friday's session led to the Dow Jones and the S&P 500 logging in weekly losses. Both the indices saw their worst one-day fall in a month, owing to rising geopolitical tensions between the U.S. and Iran. Sentiment was also soured by U.S. manufacturing data, which fell to its lowest in a decade. Ranita Young of Bloomberg News wraps up Friday's Wall Street action in this report.
U.S. stocks closed out Friday's session lower as tensions flare up between the United States and Iran. This is after U.S. President Donald Trump ordered an airstrike that killed a key Iranian general. Also during the session, investors ran for safe havens as a result. So no surprise that gold and WTI were higher. So was the U.S. dollar. Surprisingly, the U.S. dollar and gold rose in tandem. That hardly ever happens since gold is priced in U.S. dollars. However, investors were looking for safe havens everywhere during the session. We also saw quite a bit of companies news. Toyota's December U.S. auto sales unexpectedly falling by 6.1%. But Tesla's fourth quarter deliveries unexpectedly rose to a record as investors and customers rushed to meet subsidy requirements and deadlines. Also, Constellation Brands and Bed Bath & Beyond will kick off earnings during the next week. And that's your look at your Wall Street action on Friday. In New York, I'm Ranita Young for Bloomberg News.
All right, let's take a look at the Asian markets, at least the ones that are on stream right now. Rosalind Chin is joining us from the Bloomberg studios in Hong Kong. Good morning, Rosalind. Well, risk-off is the tone across the board. Can you tell us how it's looking when you look closer?
Indeed, risk off. And we are seeing, of course, Japanese markets coming on stream for the first time in 2020 because they did have a bit of an extended vacation over the new year. So they're paying a little bit of catch up here with what's been going on in the last few days. And we see the Nikkei is losing 1.85%. The Topix down by a little more than 1.5% right now. Of course, we're seeing some strength in the yen as investors look to haven currencies. And one of them, especially the yen, of course, right now, let's take a look at the yen. It is at 108.05 to the US dollar. It's advancing to 3-month highs there. Now, of course, you know, as we've been hearing, Iran has essentially torn up what was left of the 2005 nuclear agreement made with the US and other world powers. So we are seeing, of course, a lot of concern, geopolitical risks, you know, the tensions as they ratchet up. We see also some fallout from companies like Nissan. That is after Carlos Ghosn made his audacious escape from Japan, the Nissan's first trading day since that happened. Nissan is down by 1.5% at this moment in time. Elsewhere in the region, of course, well, we did have a phase 1 deal, which is expected to be signed next week. The sort of better mood around that, of course, a little bit shaken by these geopolitical issues, which have come to the fore since then. Tensions, of course, clouding that positivity that would have come from that. In Hong Kong and China, we are seeing the markets there trading lower. The Hang Seng is lower by 0.5% right now. The Shanghai Composite down by about 1/3%. We are seeing, of course, some impact from oil. Of course, as was mentioned, oil trading higher. We've seen all companies in the region also trading higher. We've got PetroChina up by more than 2%, and also CNOOC making pretty strong gains. CNOOC, in fact, one of the best performing on the Hang Seng index at this point in time. time. Lastly, we want to look at Australia because it's coming out of one of the worst weekends in terms of that bushfire crisis, in the weeks-long crisis, in fact, that it's been having. The S&P ASX 200 losing 0.5%. Qantas, one of those taking a hit. Qantas down by 2.6% after it had to cancel several flights in and out of the capital, Canberra, on Sunday. Back to you.
Thanks so much for that, Rosalind. All right. Well, let's talk a little bit more about the Iran issue and everything that's happened since last week. The fallout of the killing of Iranian General Qasem Soleimani by the US has widened. Iran has abandoned the 2015 nuclear deal and said effectively that there will be no limit on uranium enrichment in the country. And the Iraqi parliament has also voted to withdraw US troops in the country. Jody Schneider of Bloomberg News reports.
The fallout is widening on several fronts. First of all, we have calls for reprisal from the region that there be attacks on U.S. assets and U.S. service people in the region. We've seen Iraq call, the Iraq parliament actually vote that the U.S. remove its troops from that country. And on the Iranian side, we've heard from them in terms of the Iran nuclear agreement, the 2015 agreement, that they will no longer abide by a key part of that agreement, which is that they no longer enrich uranium. So in all effects, that agreement, that was the death knell for that agreement, that statement. So we have all that going on, and obviously tensions heightening. We've seen safe havens, a rush to safe havens in terms of gold and the yen, and we've seen oil hit $70 in the futures trading in London.
Jody, what's the international response been? We've just over the last sort of 10, 15 minutes or so had this joint statement from the UK, France and Germany. We're also hearing that a NATO meeting will be held later on to talk about what's going on.
That's right. We are starting to really hear from the international community, which we'd heard some things over the weekend, but now those statements are coming in pretty fast and furious. The allies of the U.S., France, Germany, the UK, are basically condemning Iran. Germany and France had continued until recently to really push for that 2015 nuclear agreement to stand up. Obviously, the U.S. had left it in 2018, so they have a real stake in this. And that NATO, calling for that emergency NATO meeting, trying to calm tensions. We had heard over the weekend from the President of France and we had heard from Germany asking that there be calm, that there not be tit-for-tat reprisals. But now we are hearing a more serious, it's time to meet, it's time to do something. So obviously everyone around the world concerned, and again also because of this increasing language, this increasingly tough language, both from Iran and Iraq in terms of wanting to kick out the U.S. troops, and President Trump, who had earlier had made some calls for calm and now is ratcheting up his rhetoric as well in terms of saying that the U.S. will, any attack on the U.S. will be met with disproportionate response. So the war of words heating up as well.
Now, Jody briefly mentioned in her report about the rise in haven assets. Oil prices are at an 8-month high, while gold prices are trading near a 7-month high. David Stringer of Bloomberg News brings you the latest.
We've seen gold benefit already this morning. As you said, they're sort of touching a more than 6-year high in early trading. And that's building off what was an incredibly strong gain in 2019. Already there'd been expectations from plenty on Wall Street that gold could continue to rise this year. The likes of Goldman Sachs and Citigroup all looking for further gains. They're looking for prices of as high as $1,600 an ounce. So that would be a further jump from where we are now. And clearly, the geopolitical tensions are going to be something that investors really going to be watching and seeing how those repercussions play out. I guess there had been some concerns, some expectation that a defusing of the trade war, the prospects for a breakthrough with the US and China, that could crimp gold's prospects. But obviously now we're seeing this further scenario and further tensions.
Well, it's so interesting to me because it seems partly like there's some investors out there who are ready. They're looking for a reason to buy, and it's not just gold. Palladium on fire.
Well, that's right, absolutely. Palladium posted, certainly touched a new record high in trading so far today. And palladium, yeah, absolutely, you'd expect that it is also winning some of that haven demand that we've seen in markets this morning, some of that sort of broader move into precious metals, but it's also quite a specific story. It is also a supply story. The metal, of course, is used in auto catalysts, and this is just down to the old supply and demand balance. Demand is rising, particularly as we see sort of tighter emissions standards in the auto industry, and global production simply can't keep up. So that's certainly spurring those price gains that we've been seeing.
On to the latest from Australia. Emergency crews are still battling over 200 fires as they continue to ravage the southeastern coast over the weekend. Hundreds of properties have now been destroyed and temperatures are rising while strong winds continue to fan the fires. Daniel Moss of Bloomberg Opinion reports.
There are a number of things that are different about this. For really the first time, the scale and the early timing of these fires, which typically come in February or March, means most Australians, crucially holidaymakers from the big southeastern cities near the coastline, are now seeing it, feeling it, tasting it, inhaling it. The scale, the timing, and geographically where this is hit make this a much more vivid thing for a majority of Australians. And look, there's the Crocodile Dundee image of Australia. In reality, it's a heavily urbanised society living in the southeastern corner of the country, and that's where these fires are now concentrated.
Dan, what have we seen when it comes to how the political class has responded? We've seen now quite strong response over the weekend from the Prime Minister, but that's only come after a lot of criticism.
Yeah, Heidi, they're in overcorrection mode right now. And this is primarily driven by the outrage, really, accompanying the Prime Minister's vacation to Hawaii. Now, it's never a great idea for politicians to go on vacation far from home when there's a national emergency. To go to Hawaii and then have his office obfuscated about it was a political disaster, and he's been in overcorrection mode ever since. The opposition Labor Party has undergone this orgy of rumination where they concluded they lost an election because they were too pro-environment. They've been running from the environment at precisely the time when they could be capitalising on it. Now, the call-up of Army reservists on the weekend, let's see how this plays out, because it raises some interesting constitutional and governance issues in Australia.
Some of those fires so large that they're causing thunderstorms. All right, let's see what's making headlines across the globe. Sue Keenan of Bloomberg News brings you the First Word headlines.
We start with the latest on U.S.-China trade. Reports from Beijing say that Vice Premier Liu He is preparing to lead a trade team to Washington next week for the signing of the so-called Phase 1 deal with the U.S. Now, the South China Morning Post says the delegation will fly to the States next Monday ahead of the ceremony on January 15th. The paper also says China was not expecting President Trump to make a unilateral announcement about the date. One U.S. service member and 2 defense contractors have been killed in an al-Qaeda-linked raid on a military base in Kenya. The Somalia-based al-Shabaab group says it carried out the attack, which comes just days after an American airstrike killed 3 members of the group. The U.S. has used Kenya as a key base for fighting al-Shabaab, which it calls a terror organization. To Hong Kong now, where dozens of people were arrested on Sunday amid a protest near the China border that turned violent during police attempts to disperse the crowds. Thousands marched against so-called parallel trading. That's where mainland Chinese enter Hong Kong each day to bulk buy goods to then sell at a profit back home. Now, there's growing resentment against the practice because it drives up prices and shop rents. Staying in Hong Kong, hospitals there have admitted 7 more people with flu-like symptoms who recently traveled to the Chinese city of Wuhan. That brings to a total of 15 the number of patients suffering from respiratory infection or pneumonia symptoms. 59 people have been diagnosed with pneumonia in Wuhan, with the cause still unknown. Chinese authorities have ruled out a recurrence of the SARS virus that killed hundreds of people back in 2003. Global news 24 hours a day, on air and on Quick Take by Bloomberg, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in more than 120 countries. I'm Sue Keenan. This is Bloomberg.
All right, let's turn to the Indian markets now. Agam Vakil is joining me to tell you all about them and also what's happening in the futures and options space. Agam, good morning. I think things changed very quickly on Friday after we spoke. We had the announcement, or rather reports coming in, of Soleimani's killing, and markets turned very sharply after that. I don't think they've turned back from where they were on Friday. How are we looking at the start of trade for us here?
Well, Alex, we are looking at problems everywhere, domestically as well as globally, and that's evident in the SGX Nifty futures, because we're looking at another drop. Down by around 0.3 percentage points. There is going to be risk-off sentiment across the globe, and that includes India as well. How did we do last Friday? Let's take a look at that as well. We did see our losses coming through. Well, not very large ones, but a lot of the gains were given away. And it was evident in the Nifty, the mid-cap and smaller cap indices, the Nifty banking indices, all saw the same. But moving on, let's take a look at how ADR spanned out, and there was further weakness there as well because of the rise in global geopolitical tension. As you can see, we aren't looking at too much in terms of gainers except for Wipro and Infosys. Infosys, of course, will report its earnings later on this week on Friday. But coming down to fund flows, surprisingly, we did see flows coming in through from FIIs, and they did buy stock worth around 1,263 odd crores on a net basis. DI is selling stock worth 1,000 odd crores. But let's talk about contributors then, and a lot of the contribution came from, well, stocks across the Nifty, not necessarily as much from some of your heavier weighted companies. As you can see, the others have contributed to as much as 50 points in the declines coming through of the 87 points that we saw in terms of decline. Coming down to futures and options space, what we are watching out for is the Nifty futures, which did see further unwinding of around 4.5%. The Nifty banking futures also saw unwinding around 3.5% in open interest. The options open interest that we are keeping an eye on is the 12,000 mark on the lower end and the 12,500 mark on the higher end. In terms of the changes in open interest, we are looking at more writing around the 12,200, 12,300, 12,400 calls. Moving on, we are also looking at a near 10.5% increase in the India Volatility Index. The Nifty put call ratio has also come off to around 1.36, and in terms of stocks, again, a lot more losers as compared to gainers, but we are keeping an eye on something like a Mindtree, which continues to gain, as was the case for Cummins India. Bharat Electronics, along with Z Entertainment, on the other hand, taking a tumble. And not too much to speak for in terms of unwinding, but we do have the handful of stocks like Indiabulls Housing Finance, BPCL, and GAIL seeing a little bit of decline. But I think, Alex, everyone should very well brace for a relatively more volatile week.
Thanks so much for that, Agam. All right, let's take you through a big story, in fact, that's been spoken about here on BloombergQuint. Adani Ports is expanding its footprint on the eastern coast. The multi-port operator has inked an agreement to acquire Krishnapatnam Port from Hyderabad-based CVR Group. Somit Sarkar is here to tell you about the contours of that deal and the implications of it. Morning, Somit, what are you picking up?
Good morning, Alex. Let's first go through the deal. Now, the enterprise value of this asset stands at around 13,572 crore rupees, of which the debt is close to 6,200 crore rupees, while the balance, that is 7,360 crore, is the equity value. So 75% of this equity value, that is 5,520 crore rupees. This is what Adani Ports will be paying to acquire this port. Now, the deal is expected to be completed in the next 120 days. On the valuation part, it is at a discount compared to Adani Ports valuation. The EV to FY19 EBITDA for of Krishnapatnam Port comes to around 10.2 times as compared to Adani Ports valuation of 13.5 times. Also, according to the company, on forward basis, the EV to FY21 EBITDA for this deal works out to be around 8.6 times. Now, how will the company fund this? Well, completely through internal accruals. Adani Ports will not be taking any debt to buy these ports. This will also keep Adani Ports FY21 leverage, that is net debt to EBITDA, at same levels of 3.2 times as compared to that of 3.1 times in financial year 2019. Now, how this acquisition benefits Adani Ports? Now, the acquisition of KPCL, that is Krishnapatnam Port Company Limited, fits well with the management vision to enter Andhra Pradesh and to also achieve the 400 million metric tons of cargo throughput by FY21 via both organic and inorganic growth opportunities. Now, along with this, the deal is also EPS accretive from day one, and the payback period of this investment is close to 4 years according to the company. Now, KPCL also has a large land bank which will allow Adani Ports to expand and grow its operations going forward.
Absolutely. Thanks so much for that, Somit. All right, now Titan has put out an update for its third quarter performance, and although it has mentioned that it will meet the lower end of its revised 11 to 13% sales guidance, the commentary apparently doesn't seem to be most encouraging. Agam Vakil has gone through just that commentary, and he's joining us to tell you about that. Agam, one would think that the headline seems okay, but you've read the statement.
Sure, Alex. So, the company is indicating a mixed quarter, but perhaps the positive here is that improvement in jewelry segment could very well take it through, at least as far as in terms of expectations of the quarter is concerned. But let me take you through what the company has suggested in the release, and well, they are suggesting that there is continuing consumer sentiment which remains weak. Walk-ins remain low, and to a certain extent, just partially, nationwide protests have also impacted at least some of the businesses for Titan. But moving on to segments, Titan's biggest segment, the jewelry segment, which contributes to over 80% of the revenues, that is where they have seen about 15% growth in retail and overall growth of around 11%, which comes in line with its guidance of around 11 to 13% for the second half of this financial year. So it does seem like there is a little bit of recovery. Do remember, last quarter the company registered a decline of 1.5% in terms of the jewelry segment. Moving on to watches, well, again, 17% of your revenues come from watches. That's where sales have remained flat after showing a lot of strength in the previous couple of quarters, and it remains flat when the industry has actually seen a decline of around 4%. So they have outperformed the industry, but the revenues still remain flat. Eyewear is not a very large segment for them, but again, this is where they're not looking at a lot of growth here either. About 2% growth coming in, but this is on the back of 28% growth in the previous quarter. That said, it's going to be a mixed quarter, but perhaps the silver lining here is the fact that they are looking at double-digit growth back in their largest segment, that is jewelry.
All right, thanks so much for that, Agam. All right, Somit is back now to tell you all about the stocks in news. Somit, what are the stocks on your list apart from the ones we've spoken about?
Well, along with Titan, Shobha also came up with its quarterly update. Now, in the third quarter of financial year 2020, the sales volume was up nearly 17%, while the average realizations fell nearly 11%. Total sales value rose 4%, while that of Shobha's share rose only 1% compared to last year. Now, sales was higher in this quarter after 2 quarters of degrowth, and the management seems optimistic on the prices going forward. HDFC, because they have reduced the retail prime lending rate on housing loans by 5 basis points, which will be effective from January 6th. Dixon Technologies, because they have partnered with Samsung for manufacturing LED TVs in Andhra Pradesh. Now remember, Dixon Technologies already makes washing machine and mobile phones for Samsung, and 40% of the total revenue comes from LED TV segment for Dixon. Force Motors, on the back of December sales number, domestic sales were up nearly 53% to close to 2,500 units versus 1,650 units last year. Ashoka Buildcon, because they have executed a concession agreement with NHI for a project in Telangana, while Dishman Pharma, because they will be considering buyback in a board meeting to be held on January 16th. IRB Infrastructure, because they have received no objection certificate from NHI to transfer 9 BOT projects to IRB Infrastructure Trust, and for the GIC investment of 49% stake in this trust. Now they have also received certificate of registration from SEBI for this trust, and 98% of the lenders have also given the approval for this deal. Now do remember, this deal is expected to be a game changer for IRB because it will reduce the company's leverage going forward. On the back of Burley's, couple of stocks. Firstly, Hathway Cable, where Norges Bank has acquired nearly 1 crore shares, and secondly, Mayur Uniquoters, where American Fund Insurance has sold nearly 16 lakh shares in the company.
All right, thanks so much for that, Somit. Well, let's take you through some of the stories you'll find on the website BloombergQuint.com. I'm sure that you are already checking that out over the course of the day, and here's to what you'll find. First up, Cyrus Smith III, the former head of Tata Sons, will not seek to return as chairman of India's biggest conglomerate despite winning a court case against his ouster. The National Company Law Appellate Tribunal had last month ordered Mistry to be reinstated as a director of Tata Companies, but in an email statement on Sunday, Mistry said he would not seek to be a director on group firms such as Tata Consultancy Services or Tata Teleservices, but he said he would vigorously pursue all options to protect his family's rights as a minority shareholder, including that of resuming the 30-year history of a seat at the board of Tata Sons. In Maharashtra politics, Deputy Chief Minister and senior Nationalist Congress Party leader Ajit Pawar has got the Finance and Planning Department, while party colleague Anil Deshmukh is the state's new Home Minister. Besides, first-time Shiv Sena MLA Aditya Thackeray has been given charge of the Environment, Tourism and Protocol departments. And finally, individual taxpayers who own a house jointly and paid 1 lakh rupees in electricity bills in a year or spent 2 lakh rupees on a foreign trip cannot file their annual income tax returns using the simple ITR-1 form. These are based on changes that were notified by the central government on Friday for the assessment year 2020-21, which essentially pertains to returns filed for income earned in the current financial year. Now, changes in the ITR are usually notified around April, so the one that has come out on Friday is earlier than anticipated. All you need to know going to trade today, that's what we just spoke about, but there's lots more that will come up in just a short while. This is Bloomberg Quint.